Everybody ready to get started?
Yes, ma'am.
Get your water, your lunch. If I kick your leg during
It's all good. It's all good.
How are you doing, Casey?
Good, how are you?
All right, we'll call the meeting to order. I'd like to welcome all of you back. We have one absence today. Reggie Ellis is not going to be with us. He and his wife had a baby girl over the Thanksgiving holiday, so I almost hope he's not listening in, because he'll need to take a nap sometime. I hope you all had a good Thanksgiving. Hope you had plenty of turkey and came back ready to get to work. We have two members who are joining us for the first time, and I'd like to take an opportunity to introduce them. Shane Hopkins and Bill Graham. Would you two like to tell us a little bit about yourself? Shane, would you start?
Sure. Shane Hopkins, married, father of two. Lived in Tallahassee since 1976, originally from Hialeah, Florida. So we left the big city, and I am certainly happy for that. Appointed to the committee by Commissioner Jackson, and probably somewhat out of my element. I worked for the Tallahassee Fire Department, have for 20 years. Recently went in the drop, and if I can ever get my wife to cooperate with me, I won't be there long. She has other ideas. You know, I had, even though I was absent, I have watched the committee meetings, and I feel somewhat up to date. And, you know, just happy to be here and contribute as much as I can.
Thank you, and we're glad to have you here. Bill?
Thank you, Lee. Good morning, everybody. My name is Bill Graham. I apologize to each of you and the committee itself for my absences. I was a late addition to the party, and my calendar, some of it was already filled up. So, but I had just left a trial, finished that, and so I'm very pleased to be here. I've lived in Tallahassee since I was 6 months old. I'm a lawyer. I'm honored and pleased to do some work for the county, so I have some rough familiarity with perhaps some of the issues that we'll be discussing here. But I'm honored and pleased to be a part of this. Look forward to working with you.
Thank you very much. Today we've got a little bit of housekeeping to do before we get started. But I want to let you know that we're very interested in the substantive discussions that we're going to have. I want to make sure that we can have an accurate record, so please make sure that you speak into the microphone, pull it next to you. Heather will be calling the roll for us. We've got to make sure that we preserve this, the votes and the activities of this committee. Somewhere somebody's going to want to listen to him sometime, so please speak into the microphone. And if you would like to be heard, I would appreciate it if you would turn your name cards up. That'll help me, and since I wasn't so good at doing it last time, I'll do better this time. If you'd like to speak on any of the items, or if you have a question, just please turn your name cards up, and we'll be happy to call on you. I want to say this. We've got a number of issues that we're going to discuss today, 5 of them that we brought up last time, and depending how far we get this week and next week, we may not need to have a December 14th meeting. That's not encouraging you to not say something, but I hope we can be expeditious in our listening and in our discussion. So with those comments, unless anybody else has any questions, I'd like to move on with the agenda. We need a motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting.
So moved.
We have a motion.
Second.
And we have a second. All of those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. We also would like to recognize at this time that we may have some citizens that would like to speak. And if there is someone in the audience that would like to speak, if you would fill out a name card, and I think we have some on both sides, we'll call your name up and you can have 3 minutes at the podium. So if we have anybody that would like to speak, we'll do so now. Sheriff McNeil, anyone else?
Commissioner Maddox.
We've got a couple. Commissioner Maddox.
Oh, no.
We'll give you a couple minutes to fill out those cards and then have some time for you to speak.
And he is, do you know? I do. Having art. Toyota. Yeah, that was my son's first truck. Small world.
Okay, thank you. We have a couple of speakers, and I'd like to recognize Commissioner Maddox, who is here today. He said he's here just to listen, so we're happy to have him. We also have Sheriff Walt McNeil, and I'd like to call the sheriff up now for his comments.
Well, good morning. I think it's still morning.
Good morning.
I didn't plan to speak. I came down to primarily listen, but after having the invitation, elected official, you got to speak. First, I commend you for the work that you volunteered to do in terms of looking at our Constitution. And I felt compelled to be here, having spent some time this week over at the state. They're doing the same thing at the state level, and many of the constitutional officers, particularly the sheriffs, are there trying to make sure that we protect the rights of the sheriffs across our state as constitutional positions. And so I wanted to come here today to hear some of the deliberations that you all are having. A particular concern to me, perhaps, is the issue of Democrat, Republicans in terms of your party affiliation. I wanted to make it at least known that I believe that citizens have a right to have a platform and understanding exactly what a person stands for, and the fact that we run in parties gives citizens the opportunity to hear that and to see what your platforms are and what you stand for. So I wanted to at least put that on the record as relates to my position on it, and I know that perhaps you guys will take that issue up at some point. But again, congratulations on your work, and look forward to hearing more and perhaps having some dialogue with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff. And we also have Tax Collector Doris Malloy here to speak with us today.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for the work that you're doing. It is important to the citizens and to this community. So I commend you all for that. Similar to the remarks that Sheriff McNeil just said, I too have been monitoring and attended the meeting yesterday of the Ethics and Elections Committee for the Constitution Review Commission. And interesting enough, some of the related issues, they are considering related issues as this committee is. But my remarks are related to the charter review and as it affects constitutionals. And I'm going to state, I've read the preliminary, I guess it's just the idea, and as I understand it today, the analysis, staff analysis will be presented on those issues that were presented. I go back to 2002, I believe, when the original charter was first proposed. And I don't know, perhaps I'm one of those that was there at the time versus the other constitutionals. But I do remember when the county delegation came to the tax collector's office and clearly stated that the charter would not affect constitutionals. And so I'm just here to remind the committee, although I know that these are all new faces, some may have been on that committee then, but to remind the staff as well of that commitment to the constitutionals, of not affecting the constitutionals. Now, I do realize that, 10 years ago, there was a limit on the amount of funds that could be raised for campaign purposes that clearly affected not just constitutionals, but it affected all elected and those running for office. And now, there's another idea that, maybe that 250 was a little low, maybe it needs to be raised a bit, which, again, but that was not the issue. But when you're dealing with elections and ideas and opinions and parties, I do think that, it's incumbent upon me to just state my opposition to that. And so I'm here to voice that as opposition to changing the way constitutionals are elected in terms of party. I indicated that I attended the meeting yesterday of dealing with the Constitution Review Commission. And yesterday, they're dealing with some of the same things, wanting to restore what the original intent of the Constitution was as it relates to constitutionals. Now, it's not the same issues, but it's related. The idea was to restore back. And I also bring up a ruling of a judge in Orange County that they too wanted to, as a charter, wanted to change the way constitutions are elected, and that judge indicated that the county did not have the authority to do so. And I'm sure that that will probably be in your staff analysis as well. But my purpose today was really to just state my opposition and just ask that, you consider the will of the people to keep constitutionals as a partisan. And I think that just from the way it's working now, my basic thought, if it's not broken, why bother with it? And I don't think that it's broken. So I would ask that you would keep it the way it is. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We appreciate your comments. Are there any other citizens that would like to be heard? Okay, we'll proceed. I want to thank them so much for sharing with us. We'll do that prior to the deliberations at each of our meetings as we go forward. This is the last meeting that we'll bring forth new ideas that we might like to put before this committee. Towards the end of this agenda, if you have an idea that we haven't discussed prior that you'd like the committee to discuss, we'll be happy to add that to the agenda and determine if that's something that we want the staff to research or to go further on. I want to remind you that we are required to have 4 votes to move any of those ideas forward to have the staff do their deliberations. And we did ask the staff last time to get some more information on 5 separate items. They're going to bring us some information on that now. They'll walk us through the items that we requested more information on, then we'll have deliberations and we'll vote to move those forward or not. And I'll remind you that this time, if we move forward to ask for charter language, it'll require a majority vote. There are 12 of us, so it'll require 7 of the 12. Well, we have 11, so 6, 5. And that vote will be by roll call. Just 1. No, Gordon is not here. No, we have 2. So we have 10, so we will need 6 votes. 2.
1 or 2 are missing. 2 are missing.
3 are missing.
Who's our third?
Gordon is missing, Anise Prosser, and
Reginald
Ellis.
Reggie Ellis, okay. Okay.
Do we need to have a roll call?
For attendance, I think we've taken attendance. We need roll calls for votes.
Okay.
So with that, we'll move on to have Vince start out with our discussion.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. You recognized our chairman, Nick Maddox, who is in attendance today. You also heard, obviously, from our sheriff and our our tax collector, Doris Malloy. I also just wanted to recognize Chris Moore from the Supervisor of Elections Office. Chris, thank you for being here. As we told you, we'd be pulling back a little more and handing the reins off to this group. So you see, Herb and I are up here. Next meeting we'll be out in the hallway or something, I guess. But this makes sense for us because we'll handle these items much like we do county commission meetings and that sort of thing. So when they fall into the administration, as the 5 that you noted that we have on your agenda today, I'll take the first 3, Herb will take the next 2, and I will introduce these items to you, hit the highlights, and then hand it back over to you all to obviously discuss and, of course, ask any questions that you might have relative to any of these items. So with that, I'll start off with the first one, which is item 4A, which is increasing the campaign contribution limits for local elections. Members, this item provides additional information related to your request pursuant to your action at your last meeting, where you garnered enough votes to get it to this point of additional staff analysis. The current county charter limits contributions to $250, as you all have discussed. This limit applies to county commissioners and constitutional officers. The previous committee recommended this charter amendment back in 2010, as we've noted to you in the past. The state limit at that time, again, was $500, and the legislature has subsequently increased that to $1,000. How does it look around the state? Well, currently 2 other county charters, as we've included in your analysis, have provisions that pertain to campaign contribution limits. Alachua County has a limit of $250, much like we do in Sarasota County has a limit of $200. That means that 17 other charter counties and the remainder, the balance of the non-charter counties, use the state limit of $1,000 currently. With that as just the high points, committee members, you'll see that the options before you in options 1, 2, and 3 provide the facilitation for you should you wish to request additional information, should you decide to take the next step forward in the process and request proposed charter amendment language come back to you, or should you decide not to take any further action on those items. That would be option 3, which would simply require a simple majority vote. And with that, committee members, I will pause, hand it back to the chair. Again, we're happy to answer any questions you might have, or just turn it back over for your committee discussion on the issue.
Neil?
Vince, do you recall by what proportion this amendment passed? I'm just curious. I know obviously it was approved by the electorate, but I'm curious what proportion of the electorate approved it.
I'm not sure. Heather, I'm not sure we've got that in the analysis, do we? I don't think we broke that down to that point. But we could certainly provide that information to
I was just
members.
Curious, how the public perceived. Obviously, it was adopted, but I'm just curious to what extent.
Kim?
That's a good point. I just think that having set our limit at half of what the state set theirs at the time that was done in 07, is that right, 07? Mm-hmm. Or 10, that it puts you with a need to revisit this issue over and over and over again. Whereas if we set our limits as the same as the state, then it makes it fairly simple that it happens as the state changes the limits. I think having it smaller makes it tougher, particularly on those that are challenging incumbents to garner enough money to run a countywide race. And maybe it's not so much a problem in the district, but I think it is in the countywide. So I'd like to see us match the state $1,000 limit and tag our limit to the state's number so that we don't have to address this again.
Casey?
Yeah. So is it the case with most of the 64 counties that they're just silent on this issue and they're by default tied to the state limit? Okay. So we would essentially, could just be proposing to strike this language altogether. Okay.
Lee, is this a change in the motion that's on the floor from 500 to 1,000, basically?
Well, it was made as a motion that it should be more than 250.
Oh, okay.
And so I guess I am making a new motion that would take it specifically to the state's limit of 1,000. I still am, 500 is fine, but you need to tag it somehow. Like maybe you do half of the state's limit, but somehow or another we need to make this a permanent fix so that it doesn't have to be addressed again and again.
Well, I agree. I think we do. We need to make it permanent, and we need to make it 1,000. I don't think that's out of order. We're in line with the state constitution, the state laws. So, if you're going to make the motion, I'd be happy to second that.
Okay, I don't think that would necessarily preclude further charter committees from making a change again, would it, Herb? No. Okay. And Gordon?
Quick question. What's the city's campaign contribution limit?
250.
So personally, I think 500 would be a better number, but I think especially given the light of what's going on, that having some consistency with the city might not be at least something to consider.
So the discussion? Neil.
I'll just reflect. I've been very interested in this issue, so I've been, just talking to folks just to get some perspective from other people about this. And I guess the overriding thing I hear from, literally people I would consider, Joe and Jane's six-pack is just more money doesn't make the process better or improve representation or democracy. So that's kind of the perspective that I'm coming from and I fully understand where Kim is coming from on this. Both in terms of challenging incumbents, I just don't know that increasing funding limits, makes for a better or more representative democracy. So that's just the perspective I'm coming from on this.
And I'll have a question. Do you think that a $250 limitation impedes someone from running for office against an incumbent? Because the incumbent would have to have the same amount of campaign contributions.
Yeah, in reference to your remarks, the PACs, the 527s, the big money's not changed, and you don't even know who made those contributions.
Yeah, understood.
So in reality, the Joe Six-Pack group that might have a candidate they favor enough that they'd like to write a check for more than $250 are inhibited to that number, but yet those that might have a $25,000 or $50,000 contribution they want to make are not inhibited at all. So really, it just those in the lower tier of giving are the ones that are more stymied than those who have a lot of money and making contributions. But I just know also for trying to find people to go make those calls and ask for those funds, it's tough. And so if you're not an incumbent with everybody just knowing you and ready to write a check for you, and you're trying to become known, when a lot of it's by mail and some of it's by other means of media, it's just expensive. And I don't think that we should limit our county officials trying to run for office in a way that's different than 64 other counties in the state of Florida or whatever the number is. I think it should be similar because of the costs are similar.
Okay, I think we have a motion on the table, and I'll restate that. Kim's motion is to raise the campaign contribution limit to the state limit of $1,000.
Yes.
Per election.
Yes.
And we have a second by Ted Thomas.
Yes.
Are you ready to vote, or are there other comments that anyone would like to make? Okay, we'll proceed with the roll call vote.
Michael Yurick?
No.
Neil Fleckenstein?
No.
William Graham?
Yes.
Lee Hinkle?
Yes.
Shane Hopkins?
Yes.
Catherine Jones?
No.
Ken Hart?
Who?
No.
Casey Perkins,
Yes.
Jay Revel,
Yes.
Gordon Thames,
No.
Ted Thomas,
Yes.
Kim Williams.
Yes.
1, 2, 3, 4. Motion passes.
What's the count?
7-5.
And we have been joined by another member, Gordon Thames. Thank you for being here.
Apologies for being late.
Did we raise it to 1,000 or did we raise it to the state limit? In other words, is it 1,000 no matter what the state does, or is it?
And my intention was, if it wasn't clear, to tag it to the state's limit so it doesn't have to be addressed again on a regular basis at this body. And it could be. It's not going to stop it.
I was just trying to be clear because when we voted on 1,000 and
okay,
I knew what you had talked about wanting, so I was trying to see if we needed.
Would you like to make a further motion? Though I'll ask Herb a question. Do you think if we what we've done is we've made it $1,000. If we tag it to the state amount, does that still not have to come back before a voting body to do?
Ultimately, but I took Mr. Williams's motion to be to strike the limitation from the charter, and then we would just be bound by whatever the elections code is.
That's the intent, and the $1,000 was called because that is the amount now. And but that.
Mike.
I'm trying to help you.
Do we need to I mean, this is just a technical issue because this is going to go,
does that change anyone's position?
Are we going to have to reapproach this and rescind what we just did and restate the motion with the second in a more clarified manner?
You can do that. I guess the question is, did anybody anybody vote yes or no based upon it being 1,000 in the charter, or does it make no difference to your vote if we just deleted it from the charter and left it at whatever the state limit is?
Is there a preference to, if we have one person that would like to revote, we can do that, because the intent of Kim's motion was to strike the 250 from the charter so that it would automatically follow state limits. Michael?
My vote will be the same, but the motion that came across was $1,000, and that's what was voted on. Whether it was the intent to follow state or not, the motion was for the $1,000 limit. So if we want to just totally strike it, then the motion needs to strike that provision in the charter.
And I think we ought to revote. Gordon, would you like to make a comment?
That was my comment, and some of us, write those checks and whatnot, but clarity. Whatever the limit is, I like a number. That would be my personal preference. I don't think it, really affects my vote. But
all right, Kim, would you restate your motion?
I'd move that we strike from the charter limitations on campaign contributions at $250, and that will leave us, as I understand it, using the state's number. We don't have to add that to the motion, right? Okay.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Discussion. Michael?
Again, we're putting a dollar amount on this. Why don't we just strike the entire provision from the charter?
That's what I just did.
That's what his motion was.
The motion was to strike the $250 provision in the charter.
It would leave no provision in the charter.
Okay, so just totally strike the provision in the charter?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
okay.
That's the amendment. Or that's the motion, to strike the language from the charter. We have a motion and a second. Would you call the roll?
Michael Yerrick,
No.
Neil Fleckenstein,
No.
William Graham,
yes.
Lee Hinkle,
Yes.
Shane Hopkins,
Yes.
Catherine Jones,
No.
Ken Hart,
No.
Casey Perkins,
Yes.
Jay Revel,
Yes.
Gordon Thames,
No.
Ted Thomas,
Yes.
Kim Williams.
Yes.
Motion passes. It remains 7-5.
Thank you.
Okay.
All All right, thank you. And that means that next time you will come back with us for language, with language.
We will. Thank you, Lee. And I'll just remind the committee that as you continue along this process, you notice, again, I know you note this by now, and of course your handy green sheet will remind you that your voting thresholds go up. And it sort of just follows the premise that, big things shouldn't happen on small margins. Again, so while you have this, you can kind of see where you are. This committee can further deliberate. Just know that ultimately you'll have to get to 10 to make it a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners. It'll have to pass by that voting threshold. Just a reminder. So committee members, that brings us to your next item, which is your Code of Ethics. The committee requested that additional staff analysis come back on including an ethics code in the county charter. Right now, Leon County has a strong ethics policy, and I know it's when you start talking about policy versus code versus amendments versus people tend to glaze over a little bit, but it's sort of the world that we live in. There's a little distinction among those things, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But we currently have a county policy which applies to commissioners, all county employees, and appointed committees. Briefly, the Code of Ethics sets very clear expectations on the governing behavior of individuals in the organization or doing work on behalf of the organization. Most of our code comes directly from Florida statutes related to ethics, and we just enumerate those very clearly in policy, which most counties do. But we're not required to do so. Our county code covers sections that are included in the analysis of your item, including standards of conduct and ethical training. I should mention that while I'm not the expert in this subject field, I happen to sit really close to him. He's right here. Herb actually does most of the Florida statutory required ethics training for newly elected county commissioners across the state of Florida. So it's good that he's right here with us. Voting conflicts, voting conflicts of interest restrictions, financial disclosure requirements, moratorium on lobbying of former county officials. We also have in place standards related to county real estate transactions. Again, our code provides for penalties, including removal or suspension from office, civil penalties not to exceed $10,000, and a loss of pension if convicted of a felony. Again, that corresponds to state law. In addition to our code in policy, again, I'll come back to that emphasis added, we have a lobbyist requirements in ordinance. That includes a registration process for lobbyists and quarterly financial reports. While we have a strong ethics policy, again, it is not included in our county charter. In comparison, 6 other Florida counties require the adoption of a county ordinance. Again, not policy, but sort of county law, making it an ordinance. One county, Orange County, again, as included in your analysis, includes the entire ethics code in their charter. I should say, and as we've mentioned in the item, we don't recommend that. We just don't think it provides enough flexibility to address potential issues that we may be dealing with in the community, to have it explicitly in the county charter. However, the inclusion of an ethics code requirement in the charter elevates the importance and the visibility of ethics for the community. We have, again, just to be clear, 6 other county charters, 6 other Florida counties where the ethics code is required by ordinance, by reference in their charter. Happy to discuss more about that. You've got the same items or the same options before you, committee members, required to dispense with the issue however you deem appropriate, including requesting staff to bring back additional information or moving it to the next step, or again, taking no further actions if you deem, depending on what you deem necessary. With that, we're happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Do you have questions? Neil?
My compliments to the staff in terms of putting this together. They did a lot of research. I think I looked at about a dozen of the charters, and I'm glad I didn't have to look at all of them. So I appreciate the work the staff did. And to your point, adopting it verbatim into the charter was not the intent when I suggested this. It really was adopting a code of ethics ordinance to really elevate the visibility of the importance of ethical behavior and accountability on behalf of all the elected officials and appointed officials and county staff as well. I think adopting it as an ordinance and putting that reference in the charter really puts it in front and center in terms of the importance for the county. And given the times that we're in, I can't think of anything more important for us to have in the constitution, basically, of the county than a requirement for integrity and ethics for all of our county staff and county employees.
Kathy?
I have just a couple questions. The first one would be, how many of the charter counties that do include language regarding an ethics ordinance include their constitutional officers in that?
Sure. I don't have a number. I do know that many of them have their code of ethics apply to all of their elected officials, as well as their committees that are appointed by the Board of County Commissioners and the county staff.
So I guess my second question would be, Herb, if we did include the provision regarding constitutional officers, how much teeth does that have?
It would be done not by policy, excuse me, so it would be by ordinance. So it's a law. It could be enforced as a law against any of those elected officials. How do you do that? There's a couple of ways, but injunctive relief, it would also perhaps, and I'll have to think about this some more about whether or not you want to have any other delegated enforcement provisions. But you would enforce it like any other law, injunctive relief generally.
Thank you.
Okay. Bill?
Excuse me if this has been covered before. I came in late, so if it has, let me know. But my question goes to enforcement as well. If we brought this into the charter and it would then become enforceable, are we not inviting a tremendous amount of uncertainty or certainly discussion in interpreting what the specific meanings of these words are? Because if it has the force of law and someone proceeds with a temporary injunction or whatever for a violation of the code, it's going to need to be fully vetted. And everyone's in favor of increased ethics, and certainly I am. But when the rubber meets the road, it can be a difficult task of defining properly these provisions such that they're suitable for prosecution.
So with that question, is that the kind of thing that you all would address if we send this back to you for more deliberations? Is that the kind of thing you would address? Or are you comfortable answering that now?
Both, actually. The guidance for any of these things, I would suggest, and that's what, if you vote to pursue this, I would suggest that we, at least initially, not in the ordinance, not deviate from what's in Chapter 112 of the statutes now. There are significant, thousands of Commission on Ethics opinions interpreting all of those provisions, which I think would guide us accordingly. So I think that there won't be as many questions unless we start fooling with the language that's in Chapter 112.
I'll follow up.
Yes.
So is the suggestion that you would just incorporate Chapter 112 into the charter?
In general, yes. There are going to be some provisions in there that will not be applicable to us.
Sure.
To add on that, Madam Chair, if I could, one of the things, just to add on to what Herb was explaining there, is that what we would plan to do if you decided to move this issue forward and recommend to the board that we adopt in the county charter by reference an ethics ordinance, in our research, we know that we have a lot in our policy, which Herb says emanates directly from statutes dealing with this issue. But we also have things in our employee code of conduct also which emanate from statute. And we have things in other places, nepotism policies and other things. What we would take the opportunity to do is to aggregate as much of that sort of thing that makes sense and put it all in one place in the Code of Ethics that we would bring back to the board as an ordinance. So we would take things, again, that may exist in our current ethics policy, but there may be other issues that exist in, again, our Code of Conduct or in some other places to make sure that we have it all in one place. So just a little additional information.
But not to be confused by this, the only thing I understand this committee is looking at, Mr. Fleckenstein's intent, again, here is that we would add a provision in the Leon County Charter that says Leon County shall adopt a code of ethics by ordinance, and sometimes you can give a deadline by no later than a year after the passage of this charter amendment. That's all you would be proposing to the board. Right. And ultimately, the Board of County Commissioners would adopt the ordinance with the code in it.
That was the intent.
Yes.
Can we include in that, Herb, that that they adopt a code of ethics that applies to and list whom it applies to?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Kim?
When you get to specificity, I think you run up against having to revisit it again or having a situation that can't be resolved because it's certain groups and not others were included that may change over time. And so if you stick with the skeletal explanation that the ethics code would be required and leave it up to the board, I think you have a lot more flexibility over time to make changes without having to come back through the charter revision.
Michael.
Well, just for clarification, if we move forward and an ordinance is created, the current county policy would still stay in place, would it not?
Yes.
So we'd have basically a duplicity? And do we run the risk of them being different so we have more of a opportunity for variances in definitions?
I believe if this passes from the committee to the board to the ballot to being adopted, I believe I would suggest to the commission that we get rid of anything that was a duplication in our policies because it's been replaced, if you would, by an ordinance. There are going to be some provisions in our personnel policies and some provisions in other policies of the board that would probably remain independent because they're really not what I would consider to be ethical obligations. They're more guidance. Like you may not supervise your brother. And that would probably stay in our personnel code. But so nepotism is in Chapter 112 and probably should be addressed, but I think that we would have it in, for example, in our personnel policies because the new employee gets a copy of that, is required to understand and follow that. And so I don't want to make that a legal violation. I want to make that a disciplinary issue.
Okay.
And I have a question based on the question that you asked, Kathy. Are constitutional officers included in this provision? So it is all elected officials and appointed by the county?
In our current policy, yes, they are covered under our current policy.
Ted.
Who has the jurisdiction over violations by constitutional officers? Is that the county commission? I guess we're making soup here or spaghetti or something, but it seems like we're including things that we may not have the ability to deal with and to take action. I don't know. I'm getting confused. I can see the need, Kathy, with all due respect, for dealing with the county employees on the county charter, but constitutional officers, I think, are separate entities, or at least I see them as separate entities. So I'm wondering if that is really appropriate to have them in our Constitution.
In the charter, you mean?
In the charter, I'm sorry.
Or would you like to opine?
Whether it's a good idea or not, I have no opinion about. I believe you can, if you wish to. Now, who has jurisdiction to enforce? Again, an individual elector could bring an action to enforce. I think it could be utilized by the governor. You know, there's the 7 deadly sins in the Constitution about things you can't do: malfeasance, misfeasance, and always my favorite, public drunkenness, is still in the Florida Constitution, and that would give, if you would, some additional fodder for a governor to say, what these violations of this code of ethics that's in Leon's law rises to the level of malfeasance in office. And I think that's how that would ultimately be enforced.
Just a reminder to Mr. Revel that that currently applies to county committees.
Oh, okay, that's good to know. Appreciate you looking out.
Gordon.
Quick question. Is it fixing something that's broken now, adding anything to what's currently in place?
You know, again, Madam Chair, Gordon, I really do think it gives us a good opportunity to, as I was saying, from a staff standpoint, we have a strong policy. As we look at our ethics code compared to others, it's pretty strong. As Herb mentioned, it checks a lot of the boxes that are currently out there. But we would view it as an opportunity to do more, again, to sort of be more clear, to eliminate duplication that exists by looking at what we have in administrative code, what we have in, for example, our lobbyist registration is not in our current policy, but in a separate ordinance. So we'd view that as an opportunity in terms of promoting transparency to lift that up as part of an ethics ordinance, which again we currently have adopted by policy. So we would view it as an opportunity to.
I have one quick follow-up, and just mechanics. My first time of this, but would this be a long thing on the ballot, or is it something that would be short?
No, because you would in the way that this is currently postured, you would just be requiring that the board adopt an ordinance, as Herb said, either upon a certain effective date enumerated in the charter, probably in the ballot language. Maybe it's 2 cents.
Michael.
In my personal opinion, this is a very thorough policy, very clear policy that the county currently has. If anything, what I'm hearing is there may be an internal process to go back and perhaps look for inconsistencies or duplications, but I'm not sure whether we need to bring this forward and put it as a condition of the charter. I think it's a situation that is and can be handled internally.
Kathy.
I appreciate that, Michael. I feel the complete opposite. Whereas I do believe this is a very strong code of ethics, I think what we're telling the residents of Leon County by putting just some simple wording in our charter is that we care about the Code of Ethics. It's important to us, given the state of affairs in our community. I think it speaks volumes. I think what we're saying is we hold our elected representatives accountable. We hold our employees accountable. And we hold committee members accountable. And I think that is incredibly important. And I'm curious now, you said that right now that this policy, the one I'm looking at right now, 305, applies to constitutional officers. Is that correct? No, it doesn't. Okay, it does not. Okay. Thank you. And in the same respect, I believe, as an individual who votes for my constitutional officers, who feels that I do not have recourse, I think it's incredibly important that we state that a code of ethics applies to them as well. I think that everyone who seeks public office needs to acknowledge and understand that they must uphold a certain level of ethics.
Thank you. Ted?
Kathy, I agree with you to a point, and that is a couple questions or concerns that I would have is the enforcement of penalties and who really has that. And the other thing, if you remove the constitutional officers from your proposal, I could support that because I think they're different entities. I think and we've seen in cases in, sheriff in other counties where the sheriff has been removed for malfeasance or whatever it might have been, which lies in the hands of the governor. And I think that's where it should continue to lie, in the hands of the governor for inappropriate behavior. So I can't get comfortable with including the constitutionals in this proposal.
And I have a question as well, Herb. The lobbyist registration is currently an ordinance.
Yes.
So if this were to be a recommendation, would that would the lobbyist registration roll into an ethics policy?
Yes. At least that's what I would recommend to the board.
Okay.
So
Michael,
I want to go back to constitutional officers because it's something when I first read this charter throughout, it just jumped out at me. And as we're having this discussion with constitutional officers, I'd like to remind this group that there's already provisions of the constitutional officers in the charter. And it says, in part, remain as independently elected constitutional officers, and the status, powers, duties, functions of each office shall not be altered by this homeroom charter or any revisions or amendment hereto. So now, if we start pulling in these constitutional officers, are we now going to, we would be forced to amend this piece of the charter?
Yes.
And that is a privilege that this committee has the authority to do.
So it would be an additional item we would need to be in consideration of if we move forward.
Okay, Neil, you had yours up next.
I was just going to ask that as part of the analysis that Herb addressed that issue of the constitutional officers and provide legal perspective on what the ramifications are of doing that. When I initially made the recommendation, I frankly hadn't considered the constitutional officers, but I think having Herb and his staff weigh in would be helpful.
Ken.
I think we should have a code of ethics that applies to everybody, including the constitutional officers. I think when they do the ordinance, the enforcement of it, if enforcement at all, will be done correctly by Herb and them in the ordinance. I'm not sure that even if it's unenforceable, we shouldn't have a public statement of what the code of ethics that we expect the constitutional officers to follow. Whether we can punish them for it or do anything about it, I think we probably can figure out a way to do what's appropriate. But even if we couldn't, I think making a public statement of what Leon County expects its constitutional officers to conduct themselves would be good. And if the only remedy is to say they violated it and see if they win re-election, so be it. But that would be a statement of what the conduct we expect. And enforcement is a separate issue, I think, that would be dealt with appropriately in the ordinance.
Gordon.
Yeah, it's a little more current events, but how would tweeting fit into this? I mean, we see it on the national level. President sends out a tweet. Half the people hate it. They're all sitting there going, how can we impeach this guy? And the other half, they like him. But my point is, I hate to see something become a tool for half of people who might hate somebody to try to remove them from an office that might be contrary to what the electorate spoke. And so it's a half a question, but I didn't know if we had a local officer tweeting like Trump, would that violate any of this?
No.
Okay. Makes me feel better. I mean, it doesn't matter left or right, looking at preserve.
That's a ballot box question, I think.
Okay. Ken, did you still have your card up? No. Kim.
I guess I'm confused. We have an ordinance now that takes care of
We have
ethics.
a policy.
We have a policy.
No,
it's not an ordinance.
A policy on ethics and an ordinance on lobbyist registration.
Well, what are most of the counties in the state? There's a policy. It sounds like a policy to me. I mean, you're not going to incarcerate somebody or put them under house arrest or fine them. Maybe that's the right place for it.
There are many policies, as we noted here, of all charter counties. There are 6 that require an ethics code adopted by ordinance. And again, those often happen through processes like these, when people amend their county charters to say, hey, we want to emphasize it, we want it to more clearly enumerate it, we want to raise it to the level of again, county law, and not have it just as a county policy. So that's the decision making that goes behind that. Many have it in policy, but again, 6 charter counties do require by charter that the board adopt an ethics code by ordinance.
Kathy?
I'm going to, and I really appreciate you bringing this up, Neil, because I think it's an incredibly important issue. I would like to go ahead and make a motion, if I may, that we request additional information and analysis. That includes the potential of bringing the constitutional officers into it. And if we did, what could we do if they violated it? Perhaps nothing, but at least it's a statement. I agree, Ken. And were there any other issues that we wanted? I would like to, if you don't mind, have a breakdown of these 6 counties that have it and just find out what it is that they have in their charter.
Okay, we have a motion to take this back for more study and a recommendation, not a recommendation, but more findings from the
and draft
staff.
Too.
I'll second the motion.
Okay. We only need 4 votes for that, is that correct?
Well, just for clarification, again, you could sort of do it, this is what Herb and I were just talking about, you could do it as a one-stepper or a two-stepper. So if you got to the point, in terms of your voting thresholds, if you got to the point where you feel like you got your minds wrapped around this enough to go with option 1 to prepare proposed charter amendments, but bring back that additional information for your consideration, then you could do it that way. If you're not there yet, and you're not ready to vote on whether you want to consider proposed charter language, but you just want more information, another agenda item like this one, then that only requires 4 votes. Really depends on the motion maker. Do you want to move forward with the proposed charter language and include that additional information, or do you want to take a two-stepper and just go with the additional information for now?
Thank you for clarifying, Mr. Long, and I would like to go ahead and, if I can, add into my motion that you bring back prepared charter language with that.
And did we have a second?
That's option 1.
I'll second that motion.
We have a second. Is there any other discussion or any other questions? All right, the motion is to bring back language for an ethics ordinance, and we can discuss that again at that time. that will require 7 votes.
It's more than that, though, right? Isn't her
With additional analysis.
With initial,
so we can have a
with
better
additional
understanding.
analysis about bringing the constitutional officers into the ordinance.
So this is part one of 2 parts as far as this charter amendment is concerned?
No, this was her motion to have charter language brought back, have it include constitutional officers, and we would vote at this meeting. We would need a majority vote to have that go to the staff, but when it's brought back to us, we'll have to vote again, and we'll require 10 of the 14 votes.
If I can clarify, I'm not necessarily suggesting they include constitutional officers. I would like for them to bring back what makes the most sense in terms of language.
That depends on what you're...
You understand what I'm saying? Thank you very much.
Excuse me, Lee.
No.
Okay.
Go ahead.
My concern is, what does my vote mean? Does my vote mean that we include the constitutional officers in this charter amendment, or does it not? If we're going to analyze it and get more information, that's one vote that I can support, but I can't support the charter amendment including the constitutional officers.
And I'd be reluctant to ask the county attorney to do what he thinks best. We're the body that is charged with making that decision. So let's clarify. Would you clarify the motion?
Again, I am asking for you to draft charter language to bring in an ethics ordinance that will be adopted. In addition, I would like information and analysis on the potential of including in that ordinance constitutional officers.
Okay, that's very clear.
So we have a hybrid option 1, option 2 combination. Because we're asking for the charter amendment language at the same time asking for additional information and analysis.
Correct. We're asking for the language, but we could amend that language at another meeting that would bring in the constitutional officers if that's what the group would like to do.
How do you
Ken.
draft something?
Well, it seems to me that nobody wants to think they're committing to something that we haven't actually done yet, but we're pretty early in the process on this issue. We even talked about it being a 2-step process. We talked about being a 1-step process, but the 1-step process still involved the 2 steps, and just whether we got some additional information ahead of time. I don't think we're making a conclusion, and a lot of the discussions have been about what is the language. Now, this is not a major drafting issue, I don't think. It's 3 or 4 sentences. I think they should do both. Just bring us back the language with and without the constitutional officers and the information. We'll have a discussion. It doesn't mean we're going to go forward at all. We can see the language we're talking about so we know what it means, and then we have this additional information. We're early in this decision-making process. We're not trying to commit anybody to a position.
Amen.
Is that a friendly amendment to my motion?
I would take it as a friendly amendment.
I accept that friendly amendment. Will the individual who seconded my motion also accept it?
I'll second that newly.
Right. Let's clarify that we're going to come back with 2 separate sets of language. Both would create an ethics ordinance. One set of language would include the constitutional officers and one would not. And we would like some separate information on both of those. All right, are we ready? Any other questions?
Let's vote.
All right, we're ready for a vote.
Michael Urick,
Yes.
Neil Fleckenstein,
Yes.
William Graham,
Yes.
Lee Hinkle,
Yes.
Shane Hopkins,
Yes.
Catherine Jones,
Yes.
Ken Hart,
Yes.
Casey Perkins,
Yes.
Jay Revel,
Yes.
Gordon Thames,
Yes.
Ted Thomas,
Yes.
Kim Williams.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
All right, thank you. We'll go on to item 4.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Committee members, this item 4C considers changes to the current charter provision related to constitutional officers. Just brief highlights, as you know, and we've discussed a bit today in dealing with other provisions, that the current charter preserves the prescribed functions and elected status of our constitutional officers, with the exception of a nonpartisan election for supervisor of elections. Under the Florida Constitution, charter counties can transfer the responsibility of a constitutional officer to an appointed position or change the elected status of a constitutional officer, or create what is called an elected charter officer in some cases, and we provided some analysis for you in the item there. But as reflected in your materials, the vast majority of charter counties have preserved their constitutional officers. A few counties have made changes, which we highlight there. Volusia County, for example, establishes a property appraiser, supervisor of elections, and sheriff as elected department heads. I have to say Volusia County is certainly a unique situation and very much an outlier in that regard. Broward, Clay, Osceola, and Volusia have transferred the finance function of the clerk of the courts to that of a county function under the county administrator. That is not an uncommon thing to do. Orange County transfers the clerk function to an elected comptroller, just to give you an idea of the variety that exists here. Miami-Dade has an appointed supervisor of elections and transfers some functions of constitutionals to the mayor's office, but Miami-Dade County is kind of its own country, so you could imagine that's a little different than most places. Your materials outline some arguments, committee members, for preserving the status quo, and why some individuals may want to make changes. Those supporting the preservation of constitutional officers generally posit that constitutional officers' duties are mandated by state law. It provides an opportunity for checks and balances. They provide for more responsiveness to voters. Those who seek revisions or would argue for revisions generally their arguments generally tend to be categorized around potential for added efficiencies, and that the ability to set additional professional requirements or qualifications on constitutional officers, or that the funding office should have the say in expenditures and that sort of thing. So we've tried to lay out objectively for you as much as possible the sort of the lay of the land here. I will tell you, which we've mentioned, but just briefly in this initial analysis, that if we did have any problems or issues related to our constitutional officers, we would very much bring those to you all. We don't. We happen to be very fortunate. We happen to enjoy a very good working relationship with our constitutional officers. Again, the board did not request that you take up anything specific here. That should also be an indication to you of the relationship that we enjoy. However, as you mentioned, Madam Chairman, this body certainly does have purview and can provide us the direction you deem appropriate. With that, I will pause and hand it back to the committee. Happy to answer any questions that you might have.
And I don't remember who brought this up, but was it the intent of the person who brought this up to either make a change in constitutional officers as to partisanship, or was it just as to their roles and responsibilities?
I brought it up.
Okay.
So if I may clarify,
yes.
It was my intention for us to look at each office and discuss the possibilities of them being elected or appointed.
Okay, thank you. And Ted, you had a comment?
No, I'm clear now. Thank you.
Okay. Ken, did you have a comment? Your card's up. All right, discussions? Anyone? Yes, Kathy.
Yes. And again, I'd like to state this is nothing against constitutional officers in Leon County, okay? It's absolutely not. It's just my understanding that having elected constitutional officers was a provision that was put in effect after the Civil War. Is that correct? Okay. And it's 2017. And it is time for us to look at and consider other options. So there's a place, still several places in the United States, where they elect their county forensic examiner. So, you know, the coroner is elected. I, Kathy Jones, okay, with absolutely no medical background, could move to one of those small communities and I could be elected county coroner. How about that? Just because something has always happened doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. I am not suggesting that our constitutional officers are not qualified. I am suggesting that this was in effect immediately following the Civil War, and maybe it's time we discuss it. That's all. I stated previously my own personal opinion. I do not believe the sheriff should ever be appointed. I believe we have checks and balances in our system. We have an appointed police chief. We need an elected sheriff. Okay, that's my personal opinion. But I do think that a lot of these offices should not be political by nature. When you elect someone, you make the office political. Period, point blank. Do we really need all of these offices to be political? And that's where I would like to begin discussion.
And would it be your considered opinion also that they should, if they are elected, that they should be nonpartisan, or is that?
I have no opinion on that.
Okay,
that was not my issue. I believe that was your issue, Mr. Thomas.
Yes.
Okay.
And that'll be brought back at the next meeting. Yes. Okay.
In regard to your motion or to your issue, again, I'm fully in favor of electing all our constitutional officers. I think this community stands firm on that. I believe in it as an individual. I believe all those folks need to be up or down by this community. I understand what happens in small communities, that people that are elected and they're not really qualified. That's unfortunate, and that's, I guess, the electorate that make that decision. I don't think that's been the case here, or the precedent here. I see no need, really, to change from what we have. I know we talked about that in the past, about the supervised election reporting to the county commission, and that has some merit. But I think the committee decided that a few years ago that it was an elected position, and I think we need to stick with that. I really see no reason to change, and I think the community has said it over again. Thank you.
I don't know that the community's ever spoken on this issue, Ted, so I'm not sure why you believe the community is set in a certain way. This has never been brought forth as a charter amendment. It's just something we do historically. So, you know, and to counter your point there that our community is, I'm gleaming from what you were saying, we're an educated electorate. I'd like to point out that given the state of things that are occurring right now, we might not be so educated as an electorate. There's some bad things that are happening in our community. And it's because people are being reelected and reelected and reelected. You know, we have, and Doris, you know I love you. This is nothing about you, Doris. But we just had turnover in our constitutional officers after constitutional officers were elected for what, 3, 4 terms, 5 terms maybe, and then a lot of the constitutional officers pick someone that they want to replace them. And because they're a famous name, because you recognize the name, a lot of people simply vote for that name they recognize. And is that necessarily what we want to do as a community. I just, like I said last time, what I want is for a conversation. That's all. I think every charter committee should have a conversation regarding this, because times do change, situations change, and some things, just because it's been historical, doesn't mean it's the best way to operate. And again, think about it. Should our property appraiser be a political position? I question that. I've been trying for 2 weeks to come up with reasons for the election of certain constitutional officers.
And I have a question. Would you then specify which or all of the officers that you would like to have discussed?
Oh, I think we should discuss all of them.
Okay. Ted.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kathy, just as a point of clarification, and where my notion that people like elected and prefer elected officers comes from consolidation votes that have occurred over the past 20 plus years. And the resounding message from that was, we don't want consolidation because we want to be able to vote for our sheriff. Now, you said you would exclude the sheriff, or you thought you would. I think that carries over to other constitutional officers. I think that permeates through this committee, and I think it's based on the votes we've taken at least 4 times on consolidation. So that's where I'm getting my information from.
If Michael. Oh, sorry.
I'm a strong supporter of civil discourse, and I think this would be a great conversation to open up publicly. I think, though, that going towards appointments based on professional capacity to serve can open up a wide spectrum of not only taking a look at the electoral process to constitutional officers, but also all elected officials. I mean, if we are going to put the standard on constitutional officers to be appointed because we are concerned about their capacity to serve, then what do we do with the county and city level of elected officials as well? So this may end up becoming a very good argument, or debate at least.
Do we have other comments? Yes.
I would just like to state that, I appreciate the consolidation argument, but, here we are talking about consolidation again. I believe the Chamber is going to bring us a report at the end of December on the potential of consolidation. So again, just because something has been historical doesn't mean that it's right, and doesn't mean that people's opinions don't change.
Okay, I don't see any other cards up.
Sorry.
That's okay. That's fine.
Just for clarification from Kathy, what would you like to see county staff bring back in regard to research on this?
I would like to have a breakdown of the roles of the constitutional officers. I would like to know what they are tasked with doing, so that we can look at whether or not that is a job that should be elected or a job that should be appointed based on credentials.
Michael.
That's outlined, if I could just refer to page 2 of the staff analysis currently in front of us. I think and maybe you're looking for a more in-depth evaluation, but that's presented on page 2 based on the background of each constitution.
No, I want more than that.
So for clarification, what are we looking for, Kathy?
I mean, if you read it, Michael, it's very broad statements.
Well, it's vague. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, it summarizes. I shouldn't say vague. It summarizes their the capacity in which they serve.
Right. Right. I guess I would like to have a little more analysis as to the job duties. I mean, my job duty is pretty broad too, but if you asked me to write down everything I do, I'm sure it's the same with you. I mean, and so I would like to know more the functions. I mean, I recognize clerk of courts maintains public records and is clerk to the, but there's more to it than that. The clerk does a lot more than that. So, you know, I would like if it's not too much work, Heather.
And I'll take Gordon's comments in a minute, but at some point we would need a motion to have action. Gordon.
Yeah, my question, Catherine, is would this lessen the electorate's voice because there would be less people they could vote for, more of it would be appointed, or the opposite?
You know, my intention is not to lessen the electorate's voice, but my intention is to consider that perhaps some roles, again, shouldn't be politicized. Maybe certain things, certain job duties shouldn't be left up to the electorate. No offense, I'm part of the electorate. However, again, if you look at the property appraiser, he assesses the fair value of all property so that property taxes can be computed. I don't know why that's a political job. I don't understand. And when you...
Well, no, I just had a quick follow-up. I didn't know whether it was proper.
Yeah, no, please.
Be vertical or horizontal here. Well, in the question, I'm just telling you, to me, it seems politics are in everything. So the politics move from the electorate to where? To who appoints them, right? So that would be like, how do I get to be property appraiser? Right now, I got to run for it, right?
Right.
Now, if all of a sudden you appoint property appraiser, then I got to come see you.
Right. Well, I think that that would be something else to include in the analysis, is exactly where do the appointments lie? What would they look like if you considered it for each office?
And Ted.
Just one small statement. I think in our society, and it relates to constitutional officers, that we need a degree of independence. Those people need a degree of independence from a county commission or an overbody. And I think on that basis, I would say we don't need to have appointed officers. There's a the treasurer of the county commission is a clerk of the court. There's a degree of independence in that position. The property appraiser is an independent person that does an analysis. They don't need to answer to a county commission as to how effective or how good their appraisers are or aren't. And you can go down the list of the other constitutional officers and ask the same question. Isn't there a need for a degree of independence rather than answering to the county commission? They answer, these two guys answer to the county commission, and they serve at the pleasure. I'm a little bit concerned that we don't have that same independence in our constitutional officers, and I frankly can't support that.
And Ted, I think we're going back and forth here.
It's a discussion, that's what you want.
Right. And you, Ted, you might be absolutely correct. You might be 100% correct on this. Again, I think it's a discussion worth having. It's worth looking at the offices to determine where each individual office should be. Perhaps it is smarter to elect your clerk of courts, your tax collector, your property appraiser. But I would still like for us to have a discussion about it. I would like for us to look at the options, because perhaps, you know, it's not the right thing to do.
Is it your intent to move?
I would like to make a motion that we just have more analysis brought back based on what I said before. Do I need to clarify that?
So right now I have a breakdown of the roles of the constitutional officers, each of them looking at their job duties, also the means by which they would potentially be appointed, what that process would look like, who would be the appointing body.
That's perfect. Thank you. I would like to make that motion.
Is there a second?
I think you're that, but option 2. in terms of the voting threshold.
Correct. I'm just requesting additional analysis. That's all. We are not, for the record, voting.
All right, we have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
All right.
Thank you.
We have a motion and a second. Are there any questions before we vote? Heather?
Michael Urick?
No.
Neil Fleckenstein?
No.
William Graham?
No.
Lee Hinkle?
No.
Shane Hopkins?
No.
Catherine Jones?
Absolutely.
Ken Hart?
No.
Casey Perkins?
Yes.
Jay Revel?
No.
Gordon Thames?
No.
Ted Thomas?
No.
Kim Williams?
No.
Motion fails.
All right. Herb, I believe you're going to discuss the next item.
Madam Chair, can I?
Yes.
I'm going to have to leave a few minutes early today. And in the interest of time, if everyone would be willing, I've read the review of the final agenda item, the idea that I had brought up, and I'm comfortable with taking no further action there. I don't know if anyone would be willing to entertain that as a motion at this point in time. It's a little off the agenda, but trying to save everyone some time for something that I intend to not see move forward.
Okay, so that...
Sorry to jump out of line there.
That's all right. So
trying to save
you're
everyone some
talking
time
about
for
item
later.
E?
Yes, ma'am.
Which is the modification of district commission election process.
Correct. This is
like
the
to
idea that I
withdraw
brought up last time.
Okay.
And so you're requesting that no further action be taken, is that?
Correct. I'd make that as a motion if anyone would.
All right, is there a second for that?
I'll second that.
Any other discussion? We'll call for a vote.
Michael Urick?
Yes.
Neil Fleckenstein?
Yes.
William Graham?
No.
Lee Hinkle?
Yes.
Shane Hopkins?
Yes.
Catherine Jones?
Yes.
Ken Hart?
Yes.
Casey Perkins?
Yes.
Jay Revel?
Yes.
Gordon Thames?
Yes.
Ted Thomas?
Yes.
Kim Williams?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you.
We're now on item D.
Madam Chair, this delightful item is now mine to discuss.
You on D?
D, yeah. Page 157.
I've tried to provide in this write-up that Heather kept making changes to. No, I made that up. That's, I tried to make sure that you had a historical background because many of us were not here in 1984 and 5 when this all started. And to show you how we got to the way we have the County Commission set up at today. I can tell you that it came as a bit of a shock to the County Commission fiscally because when I arrived here, they had not stretched the dais to include the 7 county commissioners. They only had room for 5. And so when the courthouse was being built, they only ordered the dais to seat 5, and the county attorney and the county administrator sat here, so that the 7 commissioners could. So it was not something that they had planned for. The deal is that an election plan was proposed. It was approved by the district court back in the mid-'80s. There was some discourse over how it got approved, but it went from 5 countywide elected county commissioners to the setup that you see currently, where you have 5 districts, one of which is a majority district, one of which is called a minority access district, and the other 3 district commissioners elected only by the electors within that district, and 2 at-large county commissioners that at least the 11th Circuit and the district court here found was appropriate and met the requirements of federal law. Given that that was entered by the court's order back in 86, every time there's a census, now the fun part is that since that time, the only person who's been the county attorney who's had to mess with the districts has been me. Every time there's been a census, so 90 and 2000 and 2010, in order for us to change the district boundary lines as they were initially approved by the court, which we do just because you need to have approximately the same number of electors in each of the districts and yet keep those same compositions, we have had to go back to the court with a map with the GIS people giving me the numerical numbers, and we've had to change the district boundary lines slightly. It's kind of interesting that there's never been a concern about the way we've had to gerrymander the districts, because that's not applicable to county commission districts. So with this proposal, my point in saying all that was that there's an extra step that we will have to take, and that is, and it's almost a chicken and egg sort of a thing. We will not be able to implement a change to a 3 at-large, 4 district commission without the approval of the federal district court. The Board of County Commissioners is going to have to, if you all elevate that to the board decides that they want to do that, then I'm going to have to get instructions from the board to petition the court. I'm probably going to have to hire somebody who is a consultant who can do the math for me. I was pretty good in math in high school. I'm not good with math and the Voter Rights Act. But have to go through all the statistical analysis so that we could prove to the court that this meets the Voter Rights Act. We will also have to propose it to the plaintiffs. The NAACP has been consulted every time we have had a modification of the district boundary lines, and we have been able to show them that we're still consistent with the original court order, and they have not objected in the 3 times that I've done it over the years. But they are a player in this. And
so would they have to be consulted before you did the research and filed a request with the federal courts?
Yes, but not before. Yes, before I went to the court, but I would have to show them that this does not dilute the minority voting rights that they believe that they do have right now. So it's really, and it's kind of a chicken and egg thing. So what we did in the analysis was saying, if you decide that this is something that you would want pursued, then it would not necessarily go on the 2018 ballot, because I'm not sure that I can accomplish all of those things in time to get it to the supervisor's office by August 22nd, which is our deadline for the ballot. That's a pretty short turnaround. Federal court is pretty quick, but getting all of the moving parts together, I don't think it could be done. But that should not dissuade you from saying that this is something that we ought to pursue, that it is something that the county attorney's office ought to research and do whatever it's necessary to provide the statistical basis for making the modification. But it might be something that the board would have to direct to go on the general election ballot in 2020 after all of those other component parts have been resolved. And so I wanted to give you the background. I wanted to show you the hurdles that needed to be done, but I didn't want you to come from that, okay, forget it, we can't do that at all. No, I think it won't probably be possible to do it on the 2018 ballot, but that doesn't mean you can't recommend to the board that they pursue it as a board charter amendment which would require them to, by the way, to vote 5-2 to put it on the 2020 ballot.
Okay, Neil, you had your card up first.
Yeah, I was just, can I get clarification from, I forget who suggested this particular item. Can I get clarification for the intent? As I recall, I think it was so that basically each voter would have the capability to elect a majority of commissioners, but I wanted to double check and make sure that was basically the intent of this suggestion.
Kim, was it your?
Yes. Yes.
Ken, was yours, yes, okay.
I think that's the primary reason for doing it. We could have a longer discussion about whether or not this 35-year-old court order is even needed in Leon County now, but I didn't want to go that far, and we can leave the minority districts, access districts, and the way they are, and still accomplish some of the purpose of moving to a more democratic system. I consider this to be an issue of democracy in our community. When you do these countywide issues, countywide fees, maybe there's more that involves individual districts than I know about, but most of the things that I hear discussed are countywide issues, yet I don't have an opportunity to vote for even a majority of the county commissioners. Not that I don't get to vote for all of them, but I don't even get to vote for a majority. So this was one small step that would let everybody in the community at least be able to vote on the majority of the commissioners that were doing this without disturbing what the original court order was trying to accomplish. We would still have the minority district, we would still have the access district. They would just be a little larger, but yet we would be more democratic in the result.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
But Herb, if you took this to the federal court, would they either agree or disagree that we would need to, would they opine on the issue of whether we needed to have the minority district and the minority access district?
That I haven't decided in my own mind yet what I would petition the court. My lean at the moment is to say to the court, 35 years, what you put in place worked. You don't need to retain jurisdiction anymore over Leon County. You should let us do our own. And yes, we're still going to have to meet and prove that we meet the Federal Voter Rights Act and all of the other laws that apply. But I don't think we need to be under your umbrella anymore. That's kind of my thinking.
Okay, thank you. Jay?
Herb, would you think that if we, to Ken's point, if we maintain made it very clear we maintain the majority district and the minority access district, that it would increase the likelihood of them okayness? Okay, I would certainly propose we maintain that as we move forward.
My question might be more to Ken, but if you have a minority district, we could pick one, and then that fellow gets elected by that district, how do you possibly meet the deal when you say, okay, now we're going to make that person also win the majority?
No.
Maybe I misunderstand.
I just meant that you would get to vote for your district person and the 3 at-large people, which would be 4 of the 7. You would
change.
You just add one more at-large.
Right.
No.
Change one of the districts. Instead of having 5 districts, we would have 4. And 3 at-large instead of 2. But nothing else about the process or the way you vote would change. Right now, you get to vote for whoever your district.
1 plus 2, right?
And 2. You get
yours
to vote
would
for
be 1 plus 3?
Yes. So you get to vote for 4 of the 7.
Yes, you'd have 4 single-member districts, one which would be a minority district, one would be a minority access district, the other 2 would be single-member districts, and there would be 3 at large.
But all the voting would be just like it is now, except there would be 4 districts instead of 5.
No, thank you. That helps me out, and I agree with Jay's comments, too, about.
Other questions? Ken, would you put that in the form of a motion?
Yes, I move that we move this forward to get the language and see how this would look.
Are you clear on that motion, or would you like a little more specificity?
I've got it.
Okay.
I'll second that motion.
We have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? All right, we'll have the roll call.
Michael Urick,
Yes.
Neil Fleckenstein,
Yes.
William Graham,
Yes.
Lee Hinkle,
Yes.
Shane Hopkins,
Yes.
Catherine Jones,
No.
Ken Hart,
Yes.
Casey Perkins,
Yes.
Jay Revel,
Yes.
Gordon Thames,
Yes.
Ted Thomas,
Yes.
Kim Williams.
Yes.
Motion passes.
What was the count?
11-1. 11 in favor, 1 opposed.
Thank you.
All right, that's the last of our items for discussion. We have a little bit of time, and I know, Jay, you'll have to leave, but we do have a little time. If there are others that have had some thoughts about other ideas that they'd like to bring forward, we can entertain those now.
Actually, we have 2 items from the last meeting.
We have 3 that have 2 we haven't voted on.
That's correct, we do. I'm sorry. Herb, you're up.
Oh, actually, I
Yes,
believe, Jay, you proposed this one.
I'll try to make it brief because I do have to step out. The proposed idea was to have the requirements for hiring, firing of the county attorney match the requirements of the hiring, firing of the county administrator. Currently, it requires a supermajority of the county commission to hire, fire the administrator. I would propose that we do the same for the county attorney.
I would second that.
Is there other discussion? We'll vote.
Okay. Michael Urick,
Yes.
Neil Fleckenstein,
Yes.
William Graham,
Yes.
Lee Hinkle,
Yes.
Shane Hopkins,
Yes.
Catherine Jones,
Yes.
Ken Hart,
Yes.
Casey Perkins,
Yes.
Jay Revel,
Yes.
Gordon Thames,
Yes.
Ted Thomas,
Yes.
Kim Williams.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
That's all. Trying to get Herb to stay for another 30 years. Thank you, everyone. Apologies for leaving early.
Take care, Jay.
Well done.
We also have deliberation on law enforcement consolidation. Ken, that was your suggestion. Would you like to discuss?
I don't know if this is possible, but this was my thought. I know consolidation has been a big issue in the county, and law enforcement always gets involved a lot in the discussion about whether or not to do it. But the consolidation issue aside, I think the question of law enforcement consolidation would be a good one to explore, whether or not we have consolidation. But also, if we could come up with a way to do that, it would let the other discussions take place without law enforcement being the problem. And I realize we cannot cause law enforcement consolidation to happen as a result of the charter. The question I've got for the attorneys is, could we have consolidation of law enforcement without changing the charter?
Yes.
And you mean by agreement?
There's really 2 ways you could do that. One of which is by interlocal agreement between the sheriff and the city of Tallahassee. The other way is a transfer of powers, which would require a referendum and the city commission to put it on the referendum. And it would be like an involuntary annexation, would have to pass in the city and in the unincorporated area, so dual referenda.
Is that an issue that our charter could have the possibility in place so that if the commission decided to do it, they wouldn't have to do something else, or is that something you can't do until you see the details of
Yes.
how it's done?
Yeah, I think you'd have to see the details. There's going to be, in either, however it would happen, there's going to have to be a lot of behind-the-scenes details worked out about.
Well, I really didn't think this was a good idea. I just wanted to see if everybody agreed with me.
So the answer is it can be done, but I don't believe we can do it unilaterally through a charter amendment.
Well, my thought was that we wouldn't cause it to happen, but we just have the framework in place if they decided to do it. But if that's not feasible, I don't know how to do it. So if it's not feasible, I don't know how to do it.
Catherine.
I just have one quick question. I think I heard, and it could be incorrect, that no matter what happens, the PBA has to agree to it? Is that correct? Do you know? Is there...
I don't think that they have veto authority over putting that on a ballot for referendum purposes. But there's going to be some collective bargaining issues that will have to be dealt with as a side. But that's the detail part. I mean, at some point, I don't remember where they are. I think they're in the midst of discussions for a new contract, as I recall.
They're at impasse.
They're at impasse, okay. So, but at some juncture, let's assume, hypothetically, that the city commission put it on the ballot and the county commission put it on the ballot for a dual referendum. It passes in both the unincorporated area and in the city limits. There would then need to be some heavy-duty lifting on the part of the sheriff's office and his general counsel and the city to figure out how those unionized employees would be put into the system. It may be that they can be absorbed just the way they are. But, you know, you have deputies and you have police officers. My guess is that the regular officers, probably the sergeants, maybe, I have never looked at their collective bargaining agreement, was one of the biggest benefits of coming to Leon County is that I had no collective bargaining units to deal with, unlike my prior job. But probably 3 levels likely in their collective bargaining agreement that don't have an equal in the sheriff's office right now. So they would have to, that would be a fairly significant detail thing to be worked out. I'll be long gone, but I'd be more than willing to come back and look at that because I think it'd be fun. But.
So Ken, you brought it up. Are you willing to make a motion to have staff bring back further information?
Well, unless I'm not sure what staff can do in view of what we talked about today. I'm not sure there's any realistic information to get that would move this process forward at this point.
All right, so...
I mean, do you think there is?
Well, the only way, I don't think there's any harm in if the committee wants to pursue it, that you would say, we can't put this on the charter, but County Commission, we would like you to look into doing the referendum for consolidation. That could be done.
Of law enforcement?
Right.
Well, I would move that we do that. I think it's a good idea.
Is there a second? And then we'll have discussion.
I'll second for discussion.
Okay. Kim.
I don't think everybody agrees that consolidation of law enforcement is a good idea. I think what we've got has worked well, and I know that we have a higher crime rate than other parts of the state, but I don't know that it's because our law enforcement's not doing their job. I think there's a lot of things that we can do in this community to affect that, and a lot of it's got to do with bringing jobs and educating the less fortunate in our community. So I wouldn't be in support of consolidating our law enforcement.
Well, if we're going to have a discussion about why it would be a good idea, which is what I was thinking about, a number of people that I have talked to that deal with both a lot in law enforcement and other ways, particularly in the legal system and so forth, think that there's a great deal of efficiency that can be achieved, a great deal of consolidation of programs, a great deal of coordination of programs. There just isn't much reason to have law enforcement across the street be different than the law enforcement. I mean, all the problems that were going on with the dispatch centers and so forth and consolidating them. If we had one entity that did all of that, all of those problems would be less. So this is not a real criticism of any particular side of it. It's just the question is, can it be better? Can it be more efficient? Can the programs be coordinated? And maybe the answer to that is no, but logically it seems to me that it could be more efficient, more streamlined, and more coordinated, and responsive to the citizens if we keep the sheriff. So I don't see any reason not to do it, but I respect your opinion.
Neil.
As someone who lives in Midtown and works out in the unincorporated area, I've had the experience of working with both, and both are exemplary departments. So I've never considered consolidation, frankly. I would be curious, though, I guess if you wanted to pursue this, if you could have a robust discussion, or staff, could have a robust discussion in their analysis of, pros and cons, and, what would the benefits, be associated with doing it. I understand the legal aspect is a totally different, the process is totally different, but I would be interested in knowing, I guess, what are the advantages or potential disadvantages of doing this?
Gordon?
I was going to indicate I was reluctant, but I think I might support the motion simply because if things were going swimmingly well, FSU had 11-0 record, you wouldn't make a change, right? We got a high crime rate here, and you've got headlines full of, questions about public officials, maybe doing things, maybe not. So I think it's worth, at least, it seems to me that our whole purpose is to take an examination, every 8 years or so they have this committee. So if something's not going particularly well, maybe we ask the electorate, if I was a policeman and I wanted the status quo, well, by George, I'd have a lower crime rate because everybody would be whatever. But what we're doing right now doesn't seem to be getting the job done. I saw a list the other day in the state where to move as a retiree, and they had a red thing on Leon County because of the crime rate. So I would support the motion basically because I think it tends to give people a voice in it.
Ted.
I really can't support the motion for just this one reason. I think we ought to look at consolidation as a total picture rather than just a part. And I would hope that the chamber study that's supposed to come up by the end, and sometime in December, would address those issues of economics and what we can do or can't do because of consolidation of the sheriff and police. So I would, I tend to just put that on the back burner for now and see what happens with the study that's going on with the full consolidation.
Well, and I'll ask a question of that because my understanding is consolidation has not passed in the past in past attempts, but this county and the city have done a number of interlocal agreements to functionally consolidate some of the issues that are like animal control, like environmental control. What are the other ones?
Well, we
dispatch,
have, yes,
right? Consolidated dispatch.
Sure. Yeah. To answer your question, the short answer is we've got extensive functional consolidation through city and county. If you ask me, having facilitated many of those agreements over the past, we're just about running out. And really, again, in terms of a consolidation, the next step, if you will, I think is probably more of a full consolidation and a functional. Again, we've sort of functionally consolidated what we can, and there's, you might find one or two more examples, but not very much.
Ken.
One last point. And remember, I didn't want to get into the issue of the big consolidation at this point, but unless you are sure you're against consolidation, this problem has got to be solved to have consolidation. So I thought maybe it would be easier to solve it by itself. It's the big problem. But once you take a big problem and add on a lot of other little things, then you can get a majority against it. But if you can't solve this problem, you'll always have a problem with consolidation, but you could solve this problem without dealing with the big consolidation issue. Just see if you can solve it. That was one of the reasons for bringing it forward.
And do you think, Vince and Herb, that there is more that could be done in terms of law enforcement consolidation than you've done already?
Well, in terms of law enforcement consolidation,
that's what Ken is addressing.
That's the big issue there. I mean, that would require, as Herb saying, an extensive analysis. You could certainly argue, and this gets into, some of the arguments. You could certainly argue that if you had control of the total law enforcement assets and policies to direct and target towards specific things in your community, that you could do more. In terms of efficiencies and cost savings, generally speaking, there's initial increases in cost. Is that a concern for you when you start talking about pay equalization and pensions and different things and bringing folks up to a certain minimum standard, that sort of thing? So it depends on what your objectives are. You could check a lot of boxes, perhaps in the area of, and we don't know this, but in the areas of efficiencies and coordination and that sort of thing. Would you save money? An analysis might reveal that maybe costs would go up initially. Maybe they would trail off in latter years. But that would be something that a fuller analysis would have to come back and show you.
Okay. Bill?
Yeah, I'm in favor of Ken's motion with particular emphasis on what Neil said, the financial savings that might be gained. That information would be cumulative, hopefully, to what the chamber will bring back, but I think it's fine to have two different deliberative processes.
Okay, Michael.
Mine.
All right, we have a motion, and this would be to have the staff bring back more information. So this requires 4 affirmative votes. So are we ready for a vote?
Michael Urick?
Yes.
Neil Fleckenstein?
Yes.
William Graham?
Yes.
Lee Hinkle?
Yes.
Shane Hopkins?
Yes.
Catherine Jones?
No.
Ken Hart?
Yes.
Casey Perkins?
Yes.
Jay Revel? Jason. Gordon Thames?
Yes.
Ted Thomas?
Yes.
Kim Williams?
No.
Motion passes.
All right.
New ideas?
Now we're ready for new ideas that we may not have brought up in the past.
Madam Chair, if I could, and it may be too late, but if we could revert back to item A on our agenda, when that language comes back, I would be interested, and it's totally up to this body, but I would be interested to see what the campaign finance account balances were on the final reports of the election cycle since the ordinance took place. And the reason for that is if we have a $250 campaign contribution limit, just how much was remaining in the campaign accounts on the final report with that limitation of the of campaign contributions. Does that make sense?
You said, could I ask clarification? You say what's left in their account after the election?
Yeah, what the final balance is in the campaign finance accounts.
My guess would be 0 or close to that. And because most candidates either spend it, and if they don't, they're foolish, or they give it away.
Well, and that would be my point, because we would be able to identify if there was a balance, whether they were refunding it back to the contributors to their account, or whether they were stepping forward and donating it to a local charity. And the whole bottom point of this is, if we're going to eliminate and just totally eliminate the ordinance in the charter and leave it open to the state level. I mean, is this something we really need to do? I mean, is there sufficient amount of funds already coming in at the $250 level for us really not to be concerned about it?
Is it possible to get that information, or is it already?
The final reports, the final campaign reports would reveal the kind of balances. And
with the 7-5 vote, I think it's on this issue. I think it's kind of somewhat critical information to digest.
I think the staff can come back with that information then. Very good.
Thank
So
you.
are there other ideas that we'd like to have explored by the committee? No? No. Is there any further business
Is this the
to come
last
before
meeting
us?
that we'll have an opportunity to bring forward ideas?
No, you actually have until your January 11th meeting to propose new ideas for the committee's consideration. After that, though, you'll be moving on to your deliberations process and voting on actual charter amendment language.
So the schedule from now till January, we've got a week off around the Christmas holidays. Is that the only day that we're not going to be on Thursday at?
Well, we have the potential, if we get through the discussion that we have engaged in and have asked them to come back with research on, we may not need the December 18th meeting.
Okay.
So on your green sheet, you'll see all of the dates outlined in your process, if you want to refer back to that. So starting with your November 16th meeting to January 11th, you have the ability to bring forth new issues, and staff will be bringing back analysis for you to discuss. Then January 18th and 25th, that's when you'll actually be taking a vote on draft charter amendment language. Anything moving on from that point will come to a public hearing where you will make the final vote to, whether or not to recommend those charter amendments to the Board of County Commissioners.
Yeah.
What's in the butt? Okay.
Yes.
Just one point of clarification. So if I bring up looking at constitutional offices at a different meeting, is that considered a new item? No, I'm just kidding.
All right. Thank you all very much. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Do you have a motion to adjourn?
With this now. Sorry?
Motion to adjourn?
Yes,
Motion
yes,
to adjourn.
Okay.